So let's talk about the stimulus update now. And Wall Street is excited about a potential $1 trillion stimulus package. That's why the stocks are up, right? Stock markets is excited about that. They're also excited about the jobless numbers being down today with a whopping 13% jobless number, which is astounding when you look at from these new labor statistics that just came out this morning. A remarkable number, fantastic number, and Wall Street's excited about it. So again, perhaps they know something that we don't. But there are signs, though, that a new stimulus might be too little too late if it does come. I do want to show you what Newsweek is saying this morning and whether or not we're actually going to see a new stimulus package. The second stimulus check update, Republican lawmakers are indicating that a new update or a new stimulus is going to be unlikely. Unlikely. We're hearing from a couple of different senators right now on this. Republican Senator James Langford and Senator Mitt Romney said it's unlikely that Congress would fund another round of checks. And the Hill is reporting the Republican senator said members of their party are not championing the idea. And now that you see these new labor numbers, new jobless numbers that we just saw just a few minutes ago, there may be less of a push now for a stimulus package. There may be less of a push. But I think that is woefully wrong. That's the wrong way to say it. Terribly inadequate way of looking at this. Because when you're looking at Wall Street's excitement, you're thinking about massive companies that were really unaffected by this pandemic. Really unaffected. And you think about the small businesses and the little guy that got crushed. It's not really tied to Wall Street. So I want to draw your attention to this idea of a V-shaped recovery. I think this is fascinating because what happens is in this, we're seeing that the bigger the business, the more moves, it moves the major averages in the stock market. So a Ford, a major public company. And that matters because this is the first recession where big businesses went through this thing and actually were unscathed. I talked about Apple, talked about Google, talked about Facebook, all of these big companies. They've just gone through this thing and they were virtually unscathed by the whole thing. So in a way, when you have this Wall Street recovery, you do have a V-shaped recovery, right? It plummeted, and guess what? It's back to 50-week highs. I mean, the stock market is back to basically where it was beforehand. They're doing fine. But it's the small businesses. It's the small businesses that have just gotten crushed. Let's talk about that in a second. I want to play, though, a piece of sound from Jim Cramer last night talking about this stimulus and what it could do for these small businesses. And he sees this as the biggest transfer of wealth in U.S. history that's unfolding right now. Listen to Cramer from last night.
I think we're looking at a V-shaped recovery, but it's a V-shaped recovery in the stock market. And that has almost nothing to do with the V-shaped recovery in the economy. Prosper, live. When you look at the NASDAQ 100, the tech-heavy index that briefly hit an all-time high today, it sure doesn't seem indicative of the broader jobs picture. And most of the moves that were responsible for whatever gains we had were from airlines and hotels and casinos, all of which I put in the so-called less bad category, less bad than we thought, a trend that can last a few more days before it does peter out. And people do a lot of fast gaming of it, but it does peter out. It's kind of musical chairs. How can the market rebound without the economy? Because the market doesn't represent the economy.
That's the great point there. The market doesn't represent the economy. It's virtually disconnected from you and me. That's why it's been doing just fine. In the early days of this pandemic, there was a lot of uncertainty how this would shake out, but that was just like nerves. Then once people started to realize that the big companies, they're going to be fine. They're going to ride through this just fine. And they did. So now what's at stake? It's these small businesses, right? So in order to help these small businesses make it through, the federal government needs to pass another stimulus. There is no question about it. The federal government must pass another stimulus in order to keep our economy afloat. Given the social distancing mandates that we have, restaurants, so restaurants have to separate tables, move things, they're at 50% capacity. That's not sustainable. You're basically asking restaurants to operate at a loss. Hey, open up your restaurants. That's what the Trump White House is saying. Open up restaurants. Just operate at 50% capacity so you're operating at a loss. How is that sustainable? If you want us to get back out there and to spend money at restaurants that are operating at 50% capacity, then guess what? We need some stimulus money to keep them afloat, to pay their overhead right now. More than we have in the PPP package. We need more. The American Bankruptcy Institute said on Thursday that U.S. Chapter 11 bankruptcies in May ballooned by 48% compared to a year ago. But guess what? Guess what? None of them were on Wall Street. The only company that was affected by bankruptcy that was on Wall Street as a public company was Hertz Rental Car. Isn't that stunning? So of the 48% of bankruptcies that have ballooned over the past few weeks, they're not connected to Wall Street. That's remarkable. When I looked at that number, I said, you got to be kidding me. They're not even touching the stock market, these bankruptcies. They're not in the stock market. It's this little hair salon down the street from you that filed for bankruptcy. It's the little bookstore that no one could go into. It's the little restaurant down the street from you. It's the big restaurant down the street that had to close its doors because they couldn't get access to money. Or when they got their PPP loans, it went to covering payroll. But guess what? Their rent was way higher than their payroll, and they couldn't pay their rent, and they had to go out of business. And now commercial lenders are getting crushed. Banks are going to get crushed because all of these people couldn't pay rent on those commercial spaces. We need another stimulus, and we need it now. So forget those jobs numbers that we just saw today that are frankly stunning and really exciting, but it's not touching the regular economy. It's not touching the real people. And we'll go further into these numbers to see where these recovery numbers came from. Because look, I could be totally wrong here. I hope I'm able to come back here and have egg on my face next week and say, you know what, we went deeper into these numbers, and guess what? They were all small businesses that suddenly bounced back. But I don't think that's right. My money is on the fact that these were big furloughed workers at Disney and other places which are reopening. These are not the little mom and pop shops, the little hardware store, the little bookstore, the little pizza place. So once again, it's the little guys that get hit hard here. Black communities particularly have been crushed. They have historically, of course, faced unequal access to jobs, to education, to home ownership, to business ownership. You know the list, among other things. And those things lead to generational wealth. So black communities, particularly in the United States, have gotten hurt the most in this. Those jobs got crushed, and those communities were already on the brink. And you're already seeing a country sort of split in two. The billionaires made an additional $354 billion during this pandemic. And those large businesses did just fine. But the average American got totally crushed. So Nancy Pelosi was speaking about this yesterday, and she said, look, let's stop talking about the past. How did we get here? We could go over that a million times. And I agree with her on that, right? It's like when you get in an argument with your spouse, right? Like if I get in an argument with my wife, I'm like, okay, that's okay. Yes, we got to this point now. How do we just make sure this doesn't happen again? Can we just be a better communicator? You want me to make sure I put this child to bed first or this one and put the dishes away first? Okay, I'll do it better next time. Well, let's just communicate better going forward. And then typically it's my wife, she'll say, and then she'll want to go back. You know, she likes to go back to remind me. I'm like, no, listen, we've already done that. We've already gone back. Let's just move forward. Okay. So that's what Nancy Pelosi was talking about yesterday. Let's move forward. Now, there's been enough blame to go around on how we got here, this disparity in minority communities, and not even just minority communities, really like those of, that are not the millionaires, lower and middle class Americans who just keep getting squeezed and squeezed and squeezed. What can we do as part of a broader stimulus package now to move us forward as a country, because we need something big. So here was Nancy Pelosi talking about what steps we now need to do together to move this country forward. Take a listen.
But to say, how do we go forward together? And let us recognize the role that the private sector plays in the economic life of our country, job creators, wealth creators, and the rest. But us also know that there is good governance that creates jobs as well as enables business to function because of the services rendered by the public sector.
So the public sector really talking about the idea that what can government do now to stimulate those businesses, to stimulate those jobs programs, whether it's some sort of an infrastructure program, gets people back to work, something. But what can the government do now as part of the next stimulus to get people back to work, to make sure that these communities aren't crushed any longer? But we need something big. Will we see that? It's hard to say. It's hard to say if we see Republicans that are seeming, we see Senator James Langford, Senator Mitt Romney. But what's interesting in this sort of back and forth where we hear from Republicans aren't interested in another round of stimulus money, then we heard Treasury Secretary Mnuchin just a few weeks ago saying he believes we will have another stimulus package. So right now the Senate, of course, is sitting on its hands. They've got this HEROES Act sitting on their desk. There's movement from a number of Democratic senators for a $2,000 per month stimulus package. We know this package. There's multiple versions of it, by the way. And even some Republicans are supporting a direct payment. And I think a lot of the Republicans who are vulnerable for re-election this year are probably coming out in support of a direct stimulus package. So, again, Wall Street is excited. They're excited about a next round of stimulus. But publicly, Republicans are basically saying, whoa, we're not really interested. So what does Wall Street know that we don't right now? That's what I'd like to know. What does Wall Street know that we don't? And can they, maybe they've gotten some sort of like backroom secret insider trading information from their friends in government. So many of them used to work on Wall Street that work in the White House. So maybe there's a phone call there. Yes, a stimulus is coming. Okay, good. We can breathe a little easier. The stock market, though, this morning is up 650 points. They know something perhaps that we don't know publicly. I do believe another stimulus is coming, regardless of what some of these senators are saying, some of these Republican senators. I do believe another stimulus package is coming, and frankly, it has to. It has to. If you've seen the data about China over the past 48 hours, have you? Has anybody seen the data about China? Folks, China is rising big time. And we talk about this new sort of Cold War, us trying to remain a superpower. We're losing big time right now to China. And they are rising big time. And the data out of China this morning is staggering. The stock market and the Asia stock market skyrocketing on the news of what China's recovery has done and what they are doing in manufacturing. And the stimulus packages they've put in place in China. We want to compete with them? We better get our act together, and we better get our act together fast. So if you are new here to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. Please show your support. It really means the world to us if you do that.